the recording. Want to warn you guys, you're officially now on the recorded line, recorded meeting. So bear that in mind. You never know in this world, who's going to use what against you. And so watch out what you're doing over there. But that said, I encourage you to, ask questions, try to get the most of this meeting as I go through. It's going to be only me tonight, actually, talking about all sorts of different things. So I hope you're going to get enough of me today. So my name is Teo Lachev. For those of you who are new to the group, do we have any people that are new, by the way? New to the group? You can put in the chat window. Any newcomers? Okay. There we go. Here are the newcomers. Now I'm going to ask you to tell us about yourself. Just joking. Okay, what about geographies? Do we have anybody outside Georgia or even outside United States today? Portland. There we go. Louisiana, Michigan. Any international users out there? Toronto. Okay, there's an international user right there. Well, cool. Looks like Canada is going to be the furthest away, I guess. But so this is going to be our February meeting, 7th meeting. And those of you who are new and those of you who are not new, I would like to maybe we'll find some of this introductory slides useful. So we typically meet our group, meets typically on the first Monday of the month, unless it falls on some sort of a holiday here. So, and this is our typical time, meeting time, 6:30 to 8:30. Our official group site is on Meetup. Used to be on Pass, but that organization ceased to exist. So the only actually group site that we have right now, I guess the main one is on Meetup. Although Microsoft is making some changes, they have actually a community site. So we have a presence in there as well. But this is kind of evolving, so it hasn't at this point to put a link or advertise that second website that Microsoft have. And if you are curious to check it out, when you go to Power BI, go and check the community section, and you're going to see a menu for community groups. And our group is Atlanta Power BI group, Microsoft BI and Power BI group. So you can find it there. You can join. Again, it's a work in progress. I expect, based on what I'm hearing, some interesting things to happen in that space. So maybe at some point we can actually be more involved on that side. But for the time being, Meetup is our official site. You can go ahead and sign up, get notified when we have meetings and so forth. And if you like what you're getting, if you're getting some value out of it, tell your coworkers so they can join us as well. Almost every time people asking where we're going to find the recordings. So these meetings are recorded since we became virtual. And then the link to the recordings is this one right here. Actually, let me go ahead and copy that link because I'm sure somebody will ask for it. And I'm going to put it on the chat window right here. Okay. So this is where our recordings are. This is where actually we put our recordings on YouTube. You can go and see all of them for the past year or so. If you want to get involved, a little bit more involved, if you want to present, always looking for good presenters, good speakers that actually use Microsoft technologies, not just Power BI. We also talk about organizational technologies such as all the kind of the BI Pro stack right now, more of it on Azure, like ADF, Azure Data Lake, Synapse, and so forth. Got interesting ideas? Let me know. If you have some ideas about how we can improve, I'm also very interested to hear about that, especially if you are if you volunteer to implement the improvements, because I need help. Speaking about help, I would like to take a moment also to thank everybody who is helping me. Damu, John, Eric, Neil Water Street, Mark Tabladil, who's actually started the Meetup group, the group actually on Meetup, set up the page. All of these people actually have been helping me to run this group. It's not just me, of course. And at this point, also, I would like to, ask if anyone has any job openings. If you are looking for kind of a BI talent in the area of Power BI or in the area of professional development on the Microsoft BI platform, maybe you can tell us about that, or you can put the job opening in the chat window. Does anyone have any
Thank you.
does anyone have any job openings to tell us about? Well, I'll take this as a no. Move forward. And if someone has in the chat window, you can just post it in there. So the next thing that I want to tell you a little bit about is some of the latest things that are happening in the Microsoft BI world. Power BI usually gets the most attention here. Well, nothing has been happening actually for the past month or so. Nothing very exciting because of the holidays, I guess. But here are 3 things that actually caught my attention since the last time we met. The first thing, if you want to know where Power BI is going, what's the release map? One good thing about Power BI is that Microsoft actually updates and publishes this release map. So if you go to this link in here, or if you just search on Microsoft Power Platform Release Plan, you will come to this website here where basically tells you what's coming up. So this is not just Power BI, it's also the other products that actually belong to what Microsoft called the Power Platform, which is Power BI, the Power Apps, Power Automate, and virtual agents. But given the topic of this, the subject of our group, I guess the most interest will inspire Power BI. So you can see what's coming on Power BI Premium, what's coming up in Power BI Pro, Power BI Embedded, and so forth. So good idea to check. There's some interesting things that are coming up. Nothing major, to be honest, based on obviously previous years. But some good things are coming up in near future. Then the next thing that we have is some enhancements around pipelines. I'm not sure how many of you know what Power BI pipeline is, and if you have used it, this is a premium feature, and it's all about promoting changes from one environment to another. So for example, I want to have a workspace in Power BI for development. I do there my development, then I want to promote it to a QA environment, and from QA, obviously needs to go to production. So the easiest way to do that in Power BI, if you are on premium Power BI Premium or Premium per user, is to use something called pipelines. The pipelines are getting better because the enhancements that we have here is that now they can integrate with Azure DevOps. So imagine you're a larger company, you want to set up like a fully automated process to promote those changes from one environment to another. And you want to use Azure DevOps. In Azure DevOps, we have another pipeline called Release Pipeline that actually can automate things. Previously, it wasn't possible for Power BI kind of to integrate. It was kind of a little bit difficult. So now we have actually enhancement in that area. And the third thing, those of you who are using Power BI Report Server, this is actually reporting services with an add-on to run Power BI reports. As you probably know, Microsoft updates this technology every 4 months. So if you are using Power BI Report Server as your on-prem reporting platform, then we just had January 2022 release to catch up with the latest features in Power BI Cloud. I don't see many companies nowadays, less and less companies actually using Power BI Report Server. Most of them are using the cloud technology, powerbi.com. But if you do, there are some compelling reasons that actually some organizations consider that, keeping everything on-prem, and just have like an on-prem report portal, and that's our technology for that. Any questions about this so far? I promise I'm going to check my. Okay, so somebody posted, Anna posted here a link to a job opening for BI developer. Go ahead and check that. Any questions about anything so far? Good. Well, this meeting is going to be implementing scorecards, and I'll be the presenter. Our next meeting is going to be March 7th. And we're going to talk about migrating Azure Analyse services models to Power BI Premium. So I'm a big proponent of doing that. If you guys have a BI models, don't consider Azure Analyse services. That shouldn't be at the top of your consideration. Instead, you should consider actually putting them in Power BI Premium. We talked about this before. There are some important advantages for us to do that. But many people, based on experience, still continue actually to deploy models in Analyse service. So hopefully this next presentation on March 7th will kind of show you the advantages in more detail. So I guess that's all I have to cover. Anybody has? I didn't see anything exciting about events. Typically, I have a slide for it, but I don't know. I didn't see any new events coming up from Microsoft or other vendors. Does anybody have anything to share? If you've got some event that you want to share, can use the chat window, put a link in there. Or if you have announcements, you can use the chat window, or you can announce it. Well, I guess that's it. And now what I want to do is to switch to the main presentation. Just a quick check. We got 30-something people. Awesome. Well, this presentation is going to be about implementing scorecards. And I'm not sure if many of you are familiar with the term scorecard. So I was thinking that maybe this is going to be an interesting concept for you. What I'm planning to talk about for the next hour or so is going to be, I just want to give you an overview of what the scorecard is, and also what's called balanced scorecard. And then we'll take a look how we can implement them in Power BI. So I'm going to walk you through kind of demos to demonstrate different options for implementing scorecards. And these options are essentially, obviously, we're going to use some techniques that you probably already know, such as conditional formatting. Then also I'm going to show you how Analyse Services KPIs that probably you haven't used can help us with scorecard development. And finally, Microsoft is putting a lot of effort about these scorecards recently. They were kind of a little bit neglected for a while. You know, if you have been following Microsoft BI for quite a bit some time, you probably remember a technology called SharePoint Server, where we had a product called Performance Point. It was very big on scorecards, you know, like a decade ago. But then with Power BI, it looks like we lost a little bit track of these scorecards. And then but now that Microsoft is putting effort, we'll see what they're doing around scorecards with technology called Power. For some reason I got muted. I hope you guys can hear me. And the first thing that I want to start with is to show you where you can download the slides. They're actually on my website, but I'm going to put a link in there. So, oops, is my network okay? All right, there we go. So in here in the chat window. So if you want to get the slides, the DAX code behind the measures that we're going to create, and a sample model that demonstrates what I'm going to show you, this is the link. You can go and download it, unzip it, and that will be our presentation assets. Let's go back to the slides. So first thing I want to start with is just to introduce myself for those of you who I haven't had chance to meet yet. So my name is Teo Lachev again. I'm a consultant specializing in Microsoft BI platform. I've been doing this for some 20 years. I'm helping my clients through my company called Prologica, which is a Microsoft Gold partner located in Atlanta. I'm located in Atlanta to essentially make sense of data. So I'm helping organizations of all sizes, from small companies to very large enterprises, to adopt BI in different forms. Typically, the typical assessment will be kind of a greenfield opportunity. They want to start with BI. They don't know where to start. So we start with assessment. I walk them, interview business stakeholders, identify objectives, do a gap analysis based on the current state, and define like a roadmap. And typically that roadmap also involves iteration one, which is the most important because this is where the architecture comes in. This is where the data integration comes in, what technologies are going to be used and so forth. So we get together, typically together, the client helps and I help to implement it. So that is one of the most popular scenarios nowadays. The second scenario is that kind of the horror scenario where the client actually has hired, well, I don't want to tout my horn too much, but hired somebody else and for some reason things are not working well. Promises were not kept. Client thought they would get one thing, they got completely another. So somebody's got to fix it. So I'm doing quite a bit of that as well. Um, on the credential side of things, through many, many years, I managed to accumulate a lot of credentials, a lot of certifications, but the most notable ones are I'm something called Fast Track Recognized Solution Architect for Power BI. And based on my experience, there are about 30 architects worldwide. It's kind of an award that Microsoft says, yeah, Teo actually is doing cool projects, large scale project. He knows what he's talking about. Let's actually recognize him, right? So this is an annual award. Every year you gotta go and prove that actually you have some noteworthy projects and for your clients. I'm also Microsoft MVP, used to be that for 15 years in a row. MVP stands for Microsoft Most Valuable Professional, people that are kind of involved in the community, Microsoft recognizing their contributions and their expertise. And I founded this group, actually Atlanta BI and Power BI group in 2010. I really love how the group is going. Please keep on coming. It's been great journey really to know you. And unfortunately, We cannot meet in person anymore. We used to meet in the Microsoft Office, but now we are all virtual. Hopefully that time will come back again, where actually we can go ahead and start meeting. So the bottom line, if your organization needs any help, small project, large project, doesn't matter, anything around Microsoft BI platform, if you need external help, you don't know where to go, or you just need somebody to help you, I'll be happy to talk to you to see if I could be a good fit, basically. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, you can kind of see from my publications in the book that I've written, how the Microsoft BI technology has evolved. So initially, circa 2014, reporting services came around, and then became really very popular technology. And I got excited about it. Actually, I wrote 2 books on the reporting services. And then Analyse services picked up, especially 2005, with Microsoft kind of re-architected. So now I've got a book on Analyse services, which, by the way, it's one of the most popular books there. I sold a lot of copies from that book. And then data warehousing. So I helped Microsoft Press, with some co-authored actually the training kits on data warehousing analysis and so forth. Then Tabular came around. So this is book number 6. Power Pivot and Tabular came around in 2012. So book on that. And for the past 7 years, my focus has been on Power BI predominantly as a platform. So I have a DAX book on it, and also every year, toward the end of the year, I get in the habit to revise my Power BI book. This was the first Power BI book on the market when Power BI just came out. And to my knowledge, this is the only book that actually gets revised every year. So toward the end of every year, as I mentioned, I'm trying to find something actually to revise it. Of course, every time I do that and it goes back to the publication on Amazon or whatever, they reset. It's like a starting from scratch. So if you go now in Amazon and try to find, search for Power BI books, mine is going to be all the way maybe on the second page somewhere in obscurity, because it just got published. So I got to start now climbing the ladder from scratch. And that happens every year. Kind of annoying. I don't get much credit for the previous editions, but that's how it works. Cool. That said, let's now talk about scorecards. So I'm sure that most of you by now have seen Power BI report, or have implemented, or Power BI dashboard. So reports, dashboard. So what is this thing called scorecard? Well, maybe you've heard the saying, you cannot manage something that you cannot measure. So you have to know how to measure it so you can manage it, right? So how do we manage a company? How do we manage it, right? How do we know that our company is successful? Well, we have to actually be able to compare in some kind of a quantitative way between the current state of the business and the desired state of the business. So we can say that a scorecard is kind of a glorified report or a dashboard that compares the current state and the desired state using some predefined strategic goals, also typically known as key performance indicators or KPIs. Right? But also, there is about 30 years ago, the term balanced scorecard came into popularity. In fact, that product that I mentioned, SharePoint and Performance Point, was about balanced scorecards. So what is a balanced scorecard? Well, some smart people 30 years ago said, okay, we want to measure how our company is doing. How are we going to do that? How are we going to ensure that what areas we're going to track to make sure that the company doesn't tilt too much to one area without neglecting the others? Because I can have, let's say, if I'm obsessed with the financial perspective of my company, and all I care about is revenue, but I don't care about customer satisfaction, operations, and people, then obviously my company is going to be successful. So they said, for the company to become balanced, to have a to be successful and to be balanced, we actually have to do well in 4 subject areas. And these 4 subject areas are finance, customer, operations, and people. In fact, here I have a link on the slide. If you look for a strategy map on Wikipedia, you can actually get a little bit more details about the history and what that balanced scorecard is. So, for example, in the financial perspective, typically this is where the CFO comes in. He wants to know things like revenue, margin. On the customer perspective, we want to make sure our customers are happy, actually. And how do we do that? How do we track this in quantitative ways? Well, customer growth, customer loyalty, churn will be a good indicators there. For internal business processes, or also known as operations, we can track things like, for example, if we sell things online, we can track orders on time, or whatever way we measure quality of the products. And finally, we want to make also the employees happy. So we have to be able to get some measures around their satisfaction, turnover, and things like this. So this is the 4 perspective that these people thought that will be valuable to make sure that the company is successful. And to track these 4 perspectives, we, as I mentioned, we use goals, or also known as key performance indicators. So what is a key performance indicator? Well, it represents and measures a specific goal. And if we go back to the theory, these people said that it has to follow the SMART criteria. So it's got to be specific goal, has to be measurable, has to be achievable. So everybody, I can put a pie in the sky. The company has to be 100 times, has to generate 100 times more revenue, but how achievable that is, right? So it's got to be achievable, right? Nobody wants to chase unrealistic goals. And it has to be relevant to the organization's success, because everything that we do around scorecards is to gauge the success of the company. And also it has to be time-based. We have to be able to track this over time, so we can do things like month over month, just to see how we're doing over time. And as a quick examples, on the finance side of things, again, revenue, margin, on the customer growth, turnover, operations, good KPIs will be percentage of overdue orders, availability on the product, people, employee turnover, staff satisfaction. So I hope that kind of gives you a little bit background of what scorecards are and key performance indicators. So now let's see how we can implement those in Power BI. So in Power BI, we can think about KPI as a super measure. And what do I mean by this? I'm sure by now you're familiar with DAX measures. You have used them for basic measures to more advanced, like a year to date, and even things more complicated than that. But basically, a KPI, we can say that in Power BI, it's a measure that has 4 main properties. It has a value that represents the actual value of the KPI. So for revenue, that will be the actual revenue. For target or goal, what is our desired value? So it could be a budgeted revenue, it could be a quota, sales quota, or something like that. In other words, where do we want to value is what is now. Target is where we want to be. Status is how we are doing against the target. And typically this is represented in Power BI at least as the outcome of the status will be either -1, which means we are underperforming, 0, which means that we are on track, and 1, which means that we are overperforming depending on the goal. And finally, this is actually an optional measure, optional property that is not used that much, but we can also have a trend. We want to see how we're doing over time. What is the progress of that KPI? Also, as you're going to see when we start talking about Analyse Services KPIs and how we can implement them in Power BI, and also that feature called Power BI Goals, we'll see that actually a KPI can have additional properties. such as if you want to promote accountability in our company, who is owning this KPI, something and some visualization that tell the visualize kind of some kind and or as something else. Somebody is raising hand. Dinesh. What's going on there? John or somebody else on the meeting, if you take a chance maybe to follow with Dinesh and see what's going on in there. Actually, I think that the hand went down. Anyway. Okay. Any questions so far? I promised myself that I'm going to do breaks every now and then to ask for questions. Anything? Any questions? You can ask them, unmute yourself, chat window. Sound quality was not very good. Weird. Well, I hope you guys can hear me. Don't know what's happening in there. Can you just give me a thumbs up if you hear me okay? Okay.
You are breaking up in between, Theo. I mean, right now you are good.
So did you guys miss anything? Would you like me to go back and, you know, just go over a slide or two?
It was only for a short period of time. It was for like a couple of minutes. It came in and out.
Minutes. Okay.
This, I think it was the slide before this and the beginning of this one that it broke up. So.
Okay. Well, hopefully nothing substantial got lost. But we were talking about scorecards. We're talking about KPIs. I just gave you a little bit of theory behind it. So hopefully nothing was lost through the audio glitch or during the translation. Cool. So, all right. So how do we implement those things in Power BI, right? Well, we could use the skills that we already have. Now the question becomes here really, who's going to be implementing? And a data analyst who is familiar with Power Up and familiar with DAX measures. And for the most part, we can say, I already know quite a bit. I can actually go and implement the scorecards as regular Power BI reports with some conditional formatting to spice them up, you know, make them look pretty. Well, for example, that screenshot that you see on the top, this is nothing, this it just uses DAX measures and conditional formatting. So we have a revenue, budget, variance, some other things, status, trend, and so forth. Maybe a Sparkline if you want to get interesting. I'm going to show you, by the way, how to do this. But then if you want to get a little bit more innovative, and I'm still a data analyst, I can actually bring this concept a little bit further, and we can implement those scorecards as using a feature called Analyse KPI. Actually, in fact, the first two options, the conditional formatting and Analyse KPI, this is pretty much almost the same thing. The KPI gives you some additional features, but the premise here is that I'm a data analyst, I know Power BI, I know how to create models, how to create measures. So therefore, I'm in a good position to actually create everything that I need for a scorecard. And on the other end of the spectrum is a business user. They don't know, they don't have data modeling skills. They don't know Power BI desktop. So what Microsoft decided to do for this type of users, not to leave them in the blind, you know, to allow them to create their own departmental scorecards, they introduced a feature called Power BI Goals, which is kind of a premium feature. And that feature targets these users in specifically. And we're going to talk more about this in a moment. So let's go ahead and get started and see how that's going to work actually. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Power BI Desktop. And let's say my assumption here is that I'm a data analyst. I've created a model to represent a sales, my sales subject area. Let's say I work for the sales department and I imported a bunch of tables from our familiar AdventureWorks database. But the schema really, to keep the thing simple, the schema that we want to focus on is just these 4 tables. So we have a table called reseller sales. This is our sales transactions. Every time customer goes and buys something, it goes into reseller sales as a, let's say, invoice line or something like that. Then we have a sales quota. Now that sales quota, let's say in our company, sales are, especially reseller sales to channels, they are driven by salespeople. So this employee dimension that we have here basically represents a salesperson, somebody who is responsible for that sale. And that's why we have a relationship between reseller sales and employee. But also to be able to create things like revenue KPI, we want to actually have a quota or a budget. So if we take a look at the sales quota table in here, we will see that it joins to the employee, which is our salesperson. It has a date relationship. In this particular case, they track quota on a quarter basis. So it's not for every day, not for month, but at the quarter level. And then, although it really doesn't matter because this is a date, it can be associated to any level of the date hierarchy. And then the most important thing here is the sales amount quota, which is basically tell us for that quarter, for that employee, what the quota should be. So we kind of tie all of this together and becomes, we have 2 fact tables basically, and the common dimensions are employee and date, right? I hope that's simple enough for this exercise. So now let's go ahead and start implementing, let's say, a revenue KPI. So to do that, I'm going to use some measures, DAX measures, some formulas that I put together in the assets for this presentation, and I gave you a link. So the first thing that we're going to do is nothing you haven't seen so far if you use Power BI. I'm going to create a measure for the actual revenue. And let's say I want to put that measure in the reseller sales table. Now, DAX measures, they are dynamic formulas. When you run the report, this is where they kick in their formulas. So it really doesn't matter which table you're going to associate your measure to. So the choice of the home table is completely up to you. But for me, I'm going to right-click reseller sales. I'm going to say new measure. And I'm going to go here to this beautiful formula that we have here. And I'm going to say my measure is called revenue. And the formula is going to be sum for reseller sales amount, right? I'm going to close this off. Very basic formula. Basically, we are summing a column called sales amount. And we will, while we're here, we're going to go ahead and format it with 0 decimal places. And also, while we're here, because we're going to add a few more measures, what I'd like to do with my projects, I want to put, I typically put logically related measures. I organize them in display folders so users can find them conveniently. So what I'm going to do here in the model tab, I'm going to go to the properties and I'm going to say that my display folder is going to be called revenue. This is where all my revenue related measures are going to go. Cool. So we have an actual revenue in here. Let's go ahead and also implement the budget revenue. And for the budget revenue, that's going to come from the sales quota table. Again, I can put the measure in any table. It really doesn't matter. But since it's going to come from there, let's go ahead. For some reason, that's something that always gets me is the model tab does not have the way for us to create measures. So you got to be really disciplined to go either to the report tab or to the data tab, which is where you can actually find, you can create your measures. Kind of weird, really. So I'm going to right click on the sales quota. We're going to say new measure. And that measure, what's going to do is going to say the measure is going to be called revenue budget. And what it's going to do is going to actually from the sales quota table is going to sum the sales amount quota, field. And we're going to format this measure as with 0 decimal places. So at this point, we have our revenue, actual revenue, and I can go ahead and start testing them. So from reseller sales, we're going to go to the revenue folder. I'm going to actually add the revenue measure in here, and then I'm going to go to the sales quota, and I can also add the revenue budget. All right, nothing terribly exciting so far, but let's go ahead and add a few more measures. Now, as some of you have heard me many times, I'm really not that excited about Power BI Desktop as a tool for rapid development for a variety of reasons. And one of them is that once your model starts getting bigger, you know, the way it works is that every time you make a change to even a measure, let's say you want to hide a column or you want to format the measure, every time you make a change, basically Power BI Desktop is going to commit that to the underlying engine, which is Analyse services running on your desktop. So it takes a little bit, you know, it gets annoying. And plus this toolbar that we have here for designing DAX measures, formulas, it's really horrible in my way. And finally, the third reason could be that some features actually not available in Power BI Desktop. We don't have a UI interface for them. For example, KPI being one of them, calculation groups, partitioning, all of these things are missing. So typically what I do in my projects that are not very advanced, because once you get to custom partitions, for example, then you really have to kiss Power BI Desktop goodbye, because if you use it, it's going to overwrite your custom partition design when you deploy, and you're going to lose all the beautiful changes you've done. But if I don't do custom partitioning, if it's not so advanced, then typically what I do, I kind of do the combination of the two tools. I use Power BI Desktop, and I use a community tool called Tabular Editor. Tabular Editor gives me speed of development. Power BI Desktop gives me a diagramming view and all other goodies that it has. So I'm trying basically to use the best of both worlds in my development. So what I'm going to show you here is that the other measures, I'm going to implement them by using, can you go away? Okay. I'm going to go to the external tools in Power BI Desktop, and I've already installed a few external tools in here from the community. And one of them is called Tabular Editor, which is a metadata only tool. You know, when you make a change, it doesn't have to commit anything because you're making changes directly to the model. With the caveat is that it's easy. You know, you have to have a little bit more experience because there isn't that much hand holding that is happening in the Tabular Editor. So sometimes you can do things that, you know, may not work very well. So when I click this Tabular Editor, I'm actually launching Tabular Editor side by side with Power BI Desktop, and it's going to show me because it connects to the model in Power BI Desktop. It's going to show me the same things that I have in there. So I'm going to go to my reseller sales table, and then I'm going to go right-click the revenue measure. I'm going to say duplicate. So this is one example of how easy it is to create measures. You can also do wonderful things. For example, if I want to rename a bunch of measures, or if I want to change the formulas for a bunch of measures, I can actually write scripts in Tabular Editor that allows me to enumerate from my measures and make changes. So some examples of some of the interesting things we can do. So I'm gonna say that this new measure is gonna be, let's say, called revenue variance. And for that one, the formula is going to be very simple. We're going to be subtracting the actual revenue the budget revenue from the actual revenue. The format is going to be the same. It's going to be formatted as a currency. So we do that. Then we're going to have one more measure in here. This is the revenue variance as a percentage. So let's go ahead and duplicate this measure in here. And we're going to call the new measure revenue variance percentage. And the formula for that, for the sake of time, is going to be essentially dividing the actual variance, essentially the actual revenue minus budget revenue divided by budget revenue. So this is just a straightforward DAX in here. The divide operator does a safe division in case the revenue budget is 0. So we don't have to check the denominator, and we're going to call this measure revenue variance percentage. But because this measure is a percentage, what we're going to do, we're going to go here and change the format string to what? To percentage, right? We're going to change it with 2 decimal places. That's okay. And the next measure, a little bit more complicated, is going to be the status measure. So that formula deserves a little bit more explanation. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to clone the revenue variance. I'm going to go and say this measure is going to be called revenue status. And this is my, my formula. So one cool things we have here is that we can format the DAX formula. So actually it's nicely formatted. So what's happening in here? Well, first we check if the actual revenue is blank. If it's not blank, then we proceed with this formula in here. If it's blank, we don't even have to specify a third condition in the if statement because the default value is going to be blank. But if it's not blank, if we have an actual revenue for whatever way we slice the report in the scorecard, then basically we use this a little bit of a trick here because we have multiple conditions to evaluate. So instead of doing nested ifs, if this and then if nested, just to have multiple conditions, what we're doing, we actually use this magic trick in here where we're saying, okay, force all of these conditions to be evaluated. And basically what we are doing here, we're checking the variance percentage. Remember, the variance percentage is the variance expressed percentage. If it's negative, then our status is going to return -1. If it's between 0 and let's say 30%, which means that our margin is percent. Let's say we this formulas here. Life will come from business rules. Somebody's got to tell you, what the business rules are in here. In our case, if we're within, if it's positive, if it's, yep. Somebody has a question?
Breaking up again.
I'm sorry, I did not hear.
We're breaking up again.
I cannot hear very well. Can somebody say? Do we have a problem with the audio?
Yeah, you are breaking up.
I'm breaking
you are
up.
breaking up.
Oh, is it okay now?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's horrible. Don't know what's happening in here. Sorry about that. So basically what I was saying is this rules here will depend on your business, on your real life business rules. We are saying that if we are within, if the revenue variance is positive and it's less than 30%, then we're doing okay. Otherwise, we're exceeding 30%, we're doing tremendously well. So the status measure is going to return 1. So we have that, and the final measure that we're going to add is going to be a measure for the trend of the revenue. And the trend will be another, a little bit more complicated formula in here that I'm going to copy. So that one would be, okay, so basically we want to remember the trend is your time, it's time dependent. So in my case, the way I implemented this trend is that first I have a variable. So a variable in DAX is typically performance optimization technique. So for example, if I want to check the same formula multiple times in my DAX expression, instead of changing the instead of specifying the formulas multiple times, and therefore Power BI will evaluate it multiple times. I'm doing it once at the beginning as a variable. So I'm calculating the actual revenue for the same period last year. And then I'm doing similar logic as the status. So basically what's happening here is that the actual revenue is less than the revenue last year, then the trend is going to return -1. If it's greater than 10% of the revenue last year, then it's going to return 1. So similar formulas as what we did before. So we got those things, and I can go ahead and save the Tabular Editor. When I save, it immediately commits the changes to Power BI Desktop. So if all is well, and I'm saying that all is well because sometimes for some reason, this relationship doesn't work very well. So you have to shut down Power BI Desktop and reload it. Sometimes it happens, but if everything is well, you will see the formulas carried over to Power BI Desktop that we did in the Tabular Editor. And because we specify that we just copy the formulas from the previous measure, and the display folder was set as a revenue, all of them are going to go to the revenue folder. So this is all the measures that I need for the revenue KPI. And what I can do, I can go ahead and add them to this visual as we did for the prior measures. So we're going to add the variance as a percentage. We're going to do the status, and we're going to do the revenue trend. Now, this is where we can benefit. We can benefit from some conditional formatting to make this a little bit better looking. So, for example, revenue status. Let's go ahead and visualize this as an icon. So we can go to the corresponding field in the visualization pane. By the way, don't be alarmed if my visualizations pane look different than yours. This is the new look and feel. This is a preview feature right now. So if you go to the Power BI Desktop and enable it, this is what your visualization pane is going to look like when that feature becomes GA. So if you want to try it, if you want to prepare yourself, you can actually make the switch right now. And there are some good reasons why Microsoft redesigned it. I'm not going to go through that, but there is a blog about it. That's what the new look and feel is. So what I'm going to go here, I'm going to go to the revenue status, and I'm going to go to conditional formatting, and I'm going to choose icon, which is one of the styles. And here what I'm going to say is that I can define rules, right? I can choose what the style is. Actually, the style here, it's let's just leave it like this because I have a 3 states anyway. That's the default. And I can say if the value is -1 as a number, then the icon is going to show red. If the value, remember status, the status field returns 3 values, -1, 0, and 1. 0 represents so-so performance. Therefore, I'm going to put yellow in here. And if the value is If the value is 1, then I could go ahead and actually display green. Now, what I can do here, I can also say that I really want to see just the icon. I don't want to see the actual data. I just want to see the icon. If I leave it, actually, let me just show you this. Just bear in mind that you can go back to the properties and change that. If I click OK now, I see the icon and I see the actual value in here. But since the value really doesn't make sense for me to show, let's go ahead back to the conditional format and just say, I want to see only the icon for the status. And while we're here, let's go ahead and also change the trend. I'm going to go to conditional formatting, to the icons, and I'm going to go ahead and do, let's go and use this standard arrow indicator in here. And again, remember that the trend, similar to status, returns 3 values, -1, which means that we're doing worse than whatever period we're comparing with in the past. Equals 0 will mean so-so performance, and equal 1 will mean that we are doing better historically than the previous period. In our case, it's the same period last year, but could be whatever your DAX formula is using. And let's go ahead and do icon only. And now we have our trend in here. And the beautiful thing about actually using, implementing scorecards in Power BI Desktop inside the model is that we can slice them and dice them any way we want. In this case, I'm slicing by the calendar hierarchy by date. But if the employee had hierarchy like a supervisor and salespeople, those things are going to be recalculated, just like any other regular Power BI report. So it's actually really flexible. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this is when we get to Power BI goals in a moment, you will see that there we're not so lucky. We won't be able to actually slice and dice things. Okay. So to get a little bit innovative here, what about if we want to have a Sparkline to show us the progress over time? Well, we can take advantage of one of the preview features, I believe is still in preview, called Sparkline. So similar to Excel, I can go ahead and add a Sparkline to my visual. And in my case, the Sparkline is going to be based on the actual revenue, actually. And I want to use the date field in the date dimension for the chart series. So if I do that, it generates a Sparkline column. Basically shows me what happened over time. So right now we went all the way down to the date level. We have selected 2012 second quarter. So basically what this Sparkline does in here, it shows me the trend. It shows me how the revenue has fluctuated in the 3 months of the second quarter in 2012. Right? Because we are at the quarter level. If we are at the year level, then it's going to be across the 12 months in the year. Any questions so far?
There's still no way to just eliminate something from the total line, right? Without having to write a measure that like blanks it or something under your revenue trend.
On the revenue trend, this one at the bottom, I don't think we're that advanced there, to be honest with you. So I don't think that we can do it by field. I can churn, I can churn all the values on and off for the entire visualizations, but I don't think we can do total per field. So I believe, so let's say if I go to specific column in here.
I'm sure you would know if it would have to be new if it happened.
Yeah.
I'd ask.
We have to, I have to handle it in the measure, but I just wanted to check and see if we actually have that in the specific column section, field by field, and it looks like we don't have it. Not that advanced yet. Cool. Anything else? How can we condition? Can we condition a Sparkline? So Sparklines. So Sparklines have a properties. I don't know what you mean exactly by conditioning it. You mean like changing the color of it?
Yeah, I mean,
Probably?
so can we just set a kind of point? So for example, we have a target point. Then if it's increase, that will be green. If it's decrease, that will be green.
So conditional formatting on top of Sparklines, I don't think we have it. But what we have, which doesn't show up because of this new visualization appearance, some of the properties, I guess, don't show. If I switch to the old one, you will see that it's like color, for example, to be something else. markers. So for example, you know, but you format, so certain aspects are going to be different. On color to change, you know, to be different than the previous data points in the Sparkline. Conditional formatting of Sparklines. It's a good feature though to have. Anything else? Cool. So next thing that I want to show you is how we can make this a little bit better. And to make this a little bit better, I'm going to use a feature. So far, everything we did was DAX measures, you know, but because Power BI is based on Analysis Services Tabular, this is the engine behind Power BI. In Tabular, we have something called KPI. You know, we have a standard feature in Analysis Services because it used to be so popular, and it still is. So we have a separate super measure called Key Performance Indicator. But Power BI Desktop doesn't have the user interface for that feature. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to jump back to the Tabular Editor in here. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to clone this revenue measure. And the reason why I'm cloning it is because I'm going to rename it, and I don't want to break all my existing reports. So I'm going to say, let's say this is a new measure. I'm going to call it revenue KPI. So at this point, this is just a regular measure, but watch this. You can right click on it and you can say create new KPI. And what this does, it gives me here a special indicator to tell me that this is a key performance indicator, basically special measure. So if I go to the parent folder, of course, this is the formula for we can use this formula for the actual value of the KPI, right? So this is the value property of the KPI. But if I click level in here below the measure, then, and if I expand this property in here, I can see that now I can specify I can specify the status, target, and so if I go to the status, we already have a measure. It's a good idea to have DAX measures for the status, so I can just go ahead and reuse the status. Then I can go ahead and change the property to target, and we have a measure for it. Oh, it's in a different home table. That measure was called revenue budget. And then I can go ahead and go to the trend property now. And for that one, we already have a DAX measure called revenue trend. So at this point, you might be asking yourself, well, how that is really useful. You know, we have a DAX formula, just move them from one place to another. Well, you're going to see in a moment, you know, why this is a little bit better when we get back to Power BI Desktop. Meanwhile, what we can do here, we can also specify additional properties. So, for example, I can override the format for example, if I want to change the measure format, if I want to override it to be different than the source DAX measure, we have a properties for this. But more importantly, we can tell the client tool, we can hint it how to visualize that measure. So for example, we have a status graphic property in here, and I can go ahead and say that I would like this ideally to be visualized as a traffic light signal. So we are not embedding images here. In fact, I cannot see a preview of an image. I don't have a preview. This is just a metadata. We just tell the client tool, we think that as a modeler, you should visualize this as a traffic light of some sort. But it's really up to the client tool to actually handle this. And if the client queue doesn't care about this, doesn't recognize these properties, then nothing's going to happen. But Excel and Power BI Desktop know about these properties. So when I hint them, they're automatically going to display the kind of whatever visualization they have to visualize traffic light. So we can do that for the status, and we can also do that for the trend. And here I'm going to maybe say that this is going to be visualized as a standard arrow. And pretty much that's it. When I go and save this here, and now if I go to Power BI Desktop, what do I see? Well, this is where our measures were. They were in this folder. This is where we started. This is the DAX measures we used before. But below this measures, we have a special icon that tells us that this is a KPI measure. Actually, it's a super measure that have multiple properties. So, and I can expand it, and I can see these properties. These properties are actually handled by Power BI. I never, when I set up the KPI, I never specify that the property we call value. But when I set up the expressions in the status, trend, goal, and so forth, basically they go into these 4 properties in here that are defined in the technology itself. So how is that cool? Why would we want to do that? Well, number one, we have all the related properties in one place. We define that measure, revenue KPI, and we have all the properties that we care about inside that KPI. Number two, because we also hinted the client tool about how this measure should be visualized. So let's go ahead and, for example, switch to that second page in here where we have the salespeople. And let's go and add the, oops, not separate visual. I want to add them to the existing visual. Let's go ahead and add these 4 properties in here. So what you can see when I did the status and the trend property, I didn't specify conditional formatting in here. Remember the status, when we set it up in a Tabular Editor, we said that the status should be visualized as a simple traffic light. And Power BI Desktop said, okay, that's what I'm going to use as a simple traffic light. I'm going to use this these images. And for the trend, we said that's going to be a standard error. And Power BI Desktop automatically choose one of the images that it has to visualize that as arrows of some kind. And the same thing happens in Excel. So if I go ahead and save this, and if I click on this external tool, I install, again, if you don't have this on your Power BI Desktop, don't be alarmed. There is nothing wrong with your Power BI Desktop. You really have to go and install this community tools, have to go and find them, have to install them. Once you install them, they're gonna add a icon in this ribbon in here. So I install a tool called Analyse in Excel, which simulates what's going to happen if users use Analyse in Excel when this is deployed to Power BI. Essentially, it connects Excel to this model that I'm working on the desktop. And so this is a pivot report in Excel connected to the model. And if I scroll down, what do I see? Well, I do see that now we have a special KPIs folder because Excel has detected that there are some KPIs defined in the model. And if I expand my revenue KPI, I see all the properties in here. So what I can do now in Excel, I can do the same thing that we did in Power BI Desktop very easily. I could go to the employee dimension. I can go ahead and add the full name of the employee. And then I can go to my KPI and I can say, well, show me the value, goal, status, and trend. And let's go ahead and also slice this by the date dimension in here, which could be a slicer, or it could be just drag and drop on the filters area and pivot table. And I can say, let's go ahead and set this to, let's say, 2012 second quarter. And pretty much we see kind of the same outcome as we saw in Power BI Desktop. Now this will benefit here from some formatting. So I can go back to the Tabular Editor and override the formatting of the KPI. For some reason, although it uses a base measure, DAX measure that we already have, formatting gets lost. but we can go ahead and we can go to that the corresponding property, and you can change the format. So we can override the format to make this appear a little bit nice. So KPI, to recap, so far what we've seen, we started with DAX measures. We implemented some sort of a report here. And of course, it's really up to you how you want to visualize this. You know, depends on how nice you want Scorecard to look like. In my case, I'm just using a table visualization in here. This is just for a revenue. And in this case, I want the revenue to be sliced by a salesperson, but I don't have to. If I remove the full name from here, then obviously this is going to work across all the employees, right, across the entire company, basically. So we started in here. We just used DAX measures, and then we said maybe we can graduate a little bit to the next level where we kind of also implement a KPI to make it easy for our users to find where the KPIs are and to just choose the properties, become kind of a self-encapsulated. And we did everything in Power BI Desktop. Of course, we're assuming that we have the knowledge and the skill set to create DAX measures and to work with models. Any questions so far? How are we doing as far as time?
Sorry to ask this question. Can you tell me the difference between the normal revenue that we had and the revenue KPI? Is there any difference in that both the DAX functions?
So the question is the difference between the revenue measures that we have and the KPI. Because apparently there is a confusion. Well, they show the same thing. Why do we have the two things? And again, they show the same thing pretty much. They use the same measures, and therefore, because I piggyback on the existing DAX measures, they show the same results. So if I go to the first page, which is where I use the DAX measures, and if I go to the second page, I should see the same results in there if I slice, of course, by the same filters. The reason why I did this KPI is to show you that there is a hidden feature in the underlying technology that you wouldn't see in Power BI Desktop, because Power BI Desktop does not have the user interface for all features that Analyse Services Tabular support. And what I was saying, you know, there are some good reasons for us. So maybe even if we don't have a DAX measures, I could have, if I knew that this is going to be a KPI and it's going to have a value, goal, status, I could have just went ahead, ignore the DAX measures that I did, and go ahead and create a KPI and plug in the formulas in there. But since I had them already from the previous demo, I just piggyback on the existing DAX measures. The advantages, however, to have, so this revenue KPI in here that I did achieves the same purpose as these measures that I had before. The difference is that when I do it in KPI, number one, all these measures get encapsulated. Actually, they are logically, as you can see, when I expand the KPI, the measures follow. They kind of, I can see what is associated with the KPI. So everything is in one place. Every KPI becomes a super measure, basically. That's reason number one. And reason number two is that it also looks nice. So if, for example, if now I have multiple KPIs, and instead of having bunch of DAX measures, you know, I have a kind of a leveling directional. Users can go and say, okay, this is the revenue KPI, this is the some other KPI, and you know, there is a user interface with it. When you define it as a KPI, you know, they're gonna get a special icon, both in Excel and Power BI Desktop. And the final small advantage will be that we can also hint the client tool how to visualize that KPI. We can provide hints when we configure the KPI. Do you want to visualize that as a traffic light? Do you want to visualize it as an arrow of some kind? Hoping that the client tool actually will interpret this and it will visualize it in this way. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question or made you more confused?
Yeah, it sounded similar. So except that the symbol that is appearing, how does that symbol come from?
That symbol comes from when I created this KPI. So remember, initially I did the measures. Then I said, now
Okay.
I'm going to show you a KPI. So I clone the revenue measure one more time because I decided to use that second measure as the base of the KPI. And I didn't want to
Yes.
rename it and break the existing report. So then I clone it and I right click on that measure here in the Tabular Editor. And again, I'm using this tool because Power BI Desktop doesn't know anything about KPIs. And I said, create new KPI. So when I did this in Tabular Editor, or right click on the measure, go to new, go to KPI, then it did something interesting. It added a additional icon in here below the measure that looks like a KPI. And that opened the possibility for me to go ahead and specify expressions for the status, for the target and the trend, and also gave me these properties in here.
And it will automatically refresh in the Power BI desktop without
When
re-importing
you
again.
save here, when you make a change here and you click Control S, so if you go to the File menu and click Save, then whatever changes you've made to Tabular Editor, they're going to be carried immediately to your model, right? They're going to be
Okay.
propagated immediately to your model. Now, where this may get you into trouble is when you make changes to both places. So for example, you make a change in Tabular Editor, but you forgot to save. And now you went to Power BI Desktop and you made another change in here. And then when you go to Tabular Editor is going to tell you, oh, I'm detecting that you made a change in Power BI Desktop. So your changes in Tabular Editor now, they're going to become compromised. It's going to give you a choice. Do you want to refresh the metadata? And if you refresh the metadata, and if you haven't saved your changes in the Tabular Editor, then you're going to lose them. So you have to be careful there. This is a little bit kind of a black belt technique, you know, that you have to be aware of.
Okay. Okay.
But in my opinion, the benefits outweigh the some of these things that you need to know about because you're gonna gain better experience. You're gonna be faster. You don't have to wait for every single change you make to Power BI Desktop to commit it. You're going to have already mentioned about the scripting. If you want to make a batch, let's say you have many measures and you want to change measures. The business requirements have changed. In Tabular Editor, in Power BI, I can put this under source control. It's another common requirement. Organizations, very often clients ask me, what is the best practice? Good practice. Use Power BI because it saves everything in one check. And if you can put that on Azure, you're going to see your and then it's going to say, I can't grow anymore, right? While here, I could go ahead and say, file save as. I can save this as a bit, which is the and I can put this on control. So every time somebody changes the model, there. Of course, the developers have to be disciplined when they make changes to go and actually check the changes of all things in Power in measure features that in Power BI Desktop. So that's why I can side by. Cool. Well, let's hold on questions for if you have any. So sorry, guys. How is my audio now?
It's good now.
It's good now, but it's breaking. Weird.
It does that from time to time.
Don't know why. Maybe my hub here is acting weird. It's time to change it. Anyway, let's hold the other questions if you have. I want to show you the other way to create scorecards, which just came in. Still, I believe, in preview feature. So this feature, so Microsoft got serious about scorecards recently, and they implemented a feature called Power BI Goals, which is a premium feature. So to get it, you have to be either on Power BI Premium, or you have to license your users by premium per user, which is how much? $20 per user. So you double the cost. You can get your all the premium features, or at least most of them, but you have to pay, instead of $10 per user, you can get $20 per user, and then you will get the pipelines, you will get goals, and you will get all other premium features. So what I'm going to do for this demo, I'm going Power BI Goals. You can implement it in two ways. You can implement it inside Power BI Desktop. There is a visual for it. In fact, let me go and show you. It's a preview feature. If you enable it as a preview feature in Power BI Desktop, you're going to get this new visual called Scorecard. So actually, you can start implementing scorecards directly in Power BI Desktop using this premium feature. But this feature really targets business users. So the premise here, Microsoft wants to democratize everything, make it easy for everybody to use. So the premise here is that, what about business users? They want to create their own departmental scorecards. Should they wait for IT or somebody who has knowledge of DAX to go and create this scorecard so they can track their goals across the department? And Microsoft said, well, let's make it easy for them to do that, to create their own scorecards. So in my opinion, asking a business user to go and open Power BI Desktop is going to be kind of counterproductive. So I'm going to show you how to create this scorecards by directly in Power BI service in powerbi.com. So in this tenant, I have a premium workspaces. They have a diamond icon, right? So in this workspace called Atlanta BI, we're going to create a scorecard that looks like this. So this user interface is generated by Power BI. I have no control over how it's going to be presented to the end user and what kind of visualizations are going to be used. Power BI did all of the magic for me. Not only this, but Microsoft built tremendous framework behind these scorecards that I'm going to talk about in a moment. So they have their own security, they have their own data set. So there's a lot of stuff that they did behind the scenes to support that feature. So in our case, the scorecard is going to be very simple. Let's say I'm tracking two perspectives, finance perspective and customer perspective. And inside each of these perspectives, I want to add one KPI. So for revenue, I want this to be data-driven KPI. I want to see how the actual compares to the goal. For the customer perspective, I have a KPI called base growth, which supposedly shows the growth in my customer base. For that one, I don't have a data behind it. I'm gonna enter the values manually, and along the way, we'll see how actually Power BI goals work. So let's go ahead and start with implementing a new scorecard. I'm gonna go to the new menu in here, and I'm gonna say what? I'm gonna say scorecard. Now, every user who has at least contributor permission to that workspace will be able to do that. Again, the idea here is to promote bottom-up culture where business users create their own scorecards. So they wanted to make it very, very simple. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to say, let's call our scorecard Adventure Works New. I can specify description. If Power BI is integrated with Office 365 security, I can also specify sensitivity label, things like confidential. So this is a whole different area of discussion, how to protect data and things like this. And but there is an answer for it. Power BI can actually integrate with Office 365 to get the what we call the information protection policies. So you can specify a label on the dashboard. And that label is not just a decoration. That label is more than that. You know, if you export your report and user outside the company try to view it, then Excel is not going to allow it. It's a lot of stuff behind this. So I'm not going to cover this feature in detail. Just going to say create. And here we have a scorecard, which is brand new and it doesn't have any goals. So I'm going to click on new goal in here. And I'm going to say, let's start with something simple. Let's say this is going to be, by the way these scorecards work when I start defining goals, I can create goals and sub-goals. So for example, I can have a main goal, let's say revenue, increase revenue by, I don't know what, or something like that. And then behind revenue, maybe I have a sub-goals. But I'm not going to do full-blown goals and sub-goals implementation. I'm going to use the goal level to kind of to organize. Remember if you remember my scorecard discussion, I mentioned that there are 4 areas we want to track the company performance: financial, customer, operations, and employees. So let's say this is going to be my financial perspective in here. And I'm not going to define that goal. I'm not going to specify. Again, I'm just going to use it for the to organize the sub goals. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to click on that goal that I defined. Let's just miss this for a time moment. And I'm going to say add a sub goal. And for the sub goal, I'm going to say customer growth. But now I can also specify an owner for goal or sub goal to kind of promote accountability. Now, who is owning this goal, right? Who is responsible for it? This has nothing to do with permissions at this point. There's a whole separate area for defining security, who can view the scorecard and who can change it. This is who owns this sub goal. Let's say this goal, this sub goal, there is no data. I don't have reports. I don't have measures. So, and some goals cannot be, probably don't have data for it. So what you can do for these goals, you can define them as static. You can enter your the value, the current and the target value and the status of the goal. You can manually enter it. And you just have to remember from time to time, maybe once per month, when the goal changes, to come back here and overwrite the values. So for example, here I can say, I want to format this as a percentage. And let's say I want to have 10% increase. Actually, I'm sorry, for the target, I'm going to say, let's have, my target is to increase the, so that. Doesn't format it. Okay, I have to move the focus out of it. So let's say I want to increase the customer base, the number of my customers 10%. But let's say I am currently at 7%, right? So I am behind the goal. So the status of my goal, I can manually set it to behind. I can specify start date, due date of my goal. And then when I save it, now it becomes available for other people to see, for people who have permissions to see. The interesting stuff, remember that if I have static goal, I have to manually make changes to the goal to keep it up to date. So to do that, we do something called check-ins. So when the business user hovers on top of that goal, they can click this button in here that looks like a little knot. And when they do that, they can do check-ins. So for example, I can say today, the value is not 7%, the actual value, but it's 8%, right? And I can go to the history here to see all the check-ins that have been made for this goal by me or other people. So I can do those things. I can save it. I can do a manual check-in, and you know, it's very simple for static goals. But the most interesting goal is probably going to be dynamic. So let's go and go ahead and say this is going to be my. Actually, this is not my financial perspective. You guys don't help here. This is customer perspective, right? And this is now my financial perspective. Right. So let's say I'm very excited about Scorecards perspective. So I'm starting here a new perspective to measure the finance. And what I'm going to do in here, I'm going to create a sub goal. And let's say this is going to be a revenue KPI. We don't use the term KPI in Power BI scorecards. They use the term goal, but again, goal KPI, it's kind of the same thing, right? So for this one, I have data. So now the premise here, and something that took me by surprise when actually I look at that feature, is that I was thinking that maybe you can go ahead and connect directly to the model and choose a measure to use for the actual, for the target, and for the status. But Microsoft didn't do that. Again, they wanted to make it very easy. So they said, instead of asking the user to go and go to the model and know the model metadata and how the data relate, they're probably going to be more familiar with the outcome, which is reports. So the premise here, the prerequisite for the users to actually use this feature is that they or somebody else must have created and published reports to Power BI service. In these reports, they need to include visualization that has the measures that we're going to connect to as a current, which is the actual value, as a target. So it's very important prerequisite. Power BI go depend on reports that the user has access to. And if that's the case, they can go and click and data, for example, for the current in here. They go and they have to know which report will provide that measure. So let's say I have a report here, a sales-oriented report. They go in here in that report, and now they're going to figure out which visualization has the measure that they want to use for the current value of the goal. So it so happened that here we've got a little there we go. Things don't work today. A little surface chart that I can use as that has the measures that I need. And it has this year's sales, which is the actual, and it has last year's sales. So what I can do, I can say for the actual, remember we're starting with the current value of the goal, I'm going to select this year's sales. That's going to be the measure on the report that I want to use the actual value of the goal. Now, if the visual has a field, so for example, in this case, I have a surface area chart. The x-axis is basically bound to a date field in my. Then you're going to see two options in here. You're going to see this option called track all data in this time series. What's going to happen? Power BI knows that this is on the that the data change.
Taya, we kind of lost the last minute what you just said.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to rewind this here. So sorry about this. I know what's happening. Nobody else complained, but apparently something because it's a presentation, right?
Right.
So
when
what
you
I
started talking about dates, that's when we lost you.
Right. So I was saying that if the visual has dates, like for example, this chart has a date field on the x-axis, then you're going to see this option called track all data in this time series. And as you can see, if I choose the default, it's going to track always the last value in the time series. So let's say tomorrow or the next month, depends on how often this report is refreshed. Let's say now I have a data for September 2014. Now the last one that I have is August, but maybe tomorrow I'm going to have for September or the next week, right? So what's going to happen then, the Power BI will update that scorecard, that goal with the last value, but it's going to keep the previous values. So it's going to store those values in a data set behind that scorecard. And because it has the timestamp, the date timestamp of when the value was recorded, it can do interesting things. For example, it can calculate the progress for you. It can do month over month or quarter over quarter variances automatically for the business user. So this is a useful feature. Ideally, when we connect to the visuals, to existing reports, they should have a date field on the visual itself. It has to be a date field. It cannot be a quarter or a year, something that comes from your date table. It has to be a field of a date data type, date or date time data type, for this feature to work, to actually, this feature called time series to work. If it doesn't, then you're only going to get this option in here that is going to track the overall value. Of course, you can filter this. I can specify filters on my report if I want to filter it to a particular store in this case, or particular time period. I can go ahead and set the filters on the report. And those filters are going to be carried over to the scorecard. But in this case, what's going to do is going to track the entire series, kind of the overall value, basically. And the Power BI Goals feature won't be able to calculate automatically variances for you. It won't be able to generate the progress for you. So there are some features that require date field to be present on the visual that we connect the goal to. Okay, so in my case, I'm going to choose, I already have a date field. I'm going to choose the default option. I'm going to do a connect. And there we go. Now we have a connected goal. It's disabled. I cannot make manual changes because it's connected to a existing report. And I can go ahead and also connect the target. I can choose completely different report. It doesn't have to be the same. Maybe the actual can come from one report, a target can come from another report. Now, the confusing part here is the user also have to be aware of what filters are specified on the report when they go and connect to that report. Because if they specify a filter, let's say for a particular product on one report, they forget to do it on the other report. Now, obviously, the data is not going to be good, right? So they have to know how to filter. They have to know their reports. But in my case, I'm going to use the existing report, and I'm going to go ahead and say, I'm going to use the last year sales. So let's say this is my target. My target is at least the current sales to be the same as last year sales. And I'm going to connect to it. So now I have the current value and the target value connected. Status, previously I showed you how we can manually specify the status, but also we can set up rules for the status. So for example, this is actually very similar to another feature called data alerts in Power BI, if you have used that. But I can say if the current value, if the actual revenue is greater than right now, the only option is % of target. I'm sure they're going to change that in the future. There are going to be more options. I can say if the current value is greater than 10% of the target, actually probably should be 110% of the target, right? Because we want to be exceeding whatever that works. Then we are on track. Otherwise, we're actually behind. So we can have also status of the goal defined dynamically by using rules, right? So we can go ahead and save this. And I really quickly want to go through some other features that we have here, because as I mentioned, Power BI, the team really put a lot of effort. So for example, what I was telling you before, if you have a time series data, Power BI can automatically generate the percentage because it knows how to calculate things over time. But also, as you can see here, by default, it says it calculates the variance as month over month. What about if I want to have quarter over quarter or week over week or something like this? So we can go back to this notes icon in here, and we have a settings tab where I can specify what is called tracking cycle. And that tracking cycle I can send to these predefined values. They will influence this variance, how that variance is going to be computed. Is it going to be month over month or quarter over quarter? So this is where we change that cycle, basically. Okay, so what else? So we've got this thing, it's self-updating. If the goals are connected, you can forget about changing your dashboard, your scorecard. When the report data changes, all of this automatically is going to be changed for you when the user go and refresh the scorecard. Refreshing meaning not schedule it for refresh, just go into the scorecard. You don't need to actually schedule the scorecard to refresh itself. It automatically monitors the related reports. You have a nice summary here, how many goals you have, how many are overdue and so forth in different statuses. More importantly, if I go back to my workspace, Power BI workspace, I see my scorecard. It has a special icon, but also I see that Power BI created a data set automatically. So as it turns out, Power BI also stores changes in these goals. Historical, it keeps history, for example, of the goal goal actual, target, status, and so forth. So what I can do, I can actually go ahead and I can go ahead and create a new report directly connected to that data set, right? Because this is just a regular Power BI data set. I can go actually create a new report, and I can see the model that Microsoft built to track all of this. So we have statuses table, we have a values table, we have goals table. So actually I can go ahead and create my own reports using the data that Microsoft automatically captures when the underlying reports update. And the final thing that I really like is that they also build automation around goals. So maybe you heard about technology called Power Automate that allows you to fire workflows when something happens. For example, a new mail comes in, you check the subject of the email, and then you do something, right? So Power Automate knows about goals, Power BI goals, about this feature. So you can have a flow, for example, that when the goal status changes, go and notify someone, right? Or go and send an email or save something in the database. So there is an integration between Power BI and Power Automate. And a lot of the triggers that you're going to see in Power Automate are related to goals. They're currently in preview, but they're there. You can actually experiment with this. So to recap, before I open it for questions, I showed you in this presentation several ways to implement scorecards, which essentially are two ways, depending on who's going to be doing the work. Is it data analyst or business users? If I'm a data analyst, I can create DAX measures, I can conditionally format them, I can go one step further by creating a KPI. It has some advantages for us, as we talked about. If I'm a business user and I don't want to know anything about Power BI desktop modeling and DAX, there is an option for using this premium Power BI goals feature, which is this last column in here. So you have to be licensed as Power BI Premium, Premium per user. You have to have existing reports. The presentation is defined by Microsoft. So when we created that dashboard in here, you saw that I didn't have to do anything. No, did I close it? Maybe I did. Anyway, I didn't have to do anything for the visualization to define the visualization. Power BI did it for me. And currently, I cannot control that presentation. Besides organizing goals and sub-goals, that's pretty much it, what I can do. But Microsoft has plans to make that more flexible. One big disadvantage of Power BI goals that I see today is that there are disconnected goals. So what about if I want to have a hierarchy? What about if I want to see like what we did in Power BI desktop? I wanted to see the goal broken down by salesperson. You can do that in Power BI goals. You know, pretty much you have a one-liner on the scorecard for your goal. You can filter it any way you want from the underlying report, but you won't be able to get anything more than one line. You won't be able to drill down from a high level to a lower level, right? You won't be able to do that. It's not possible in Power BI goals to do that yet. They have on the roadmap, they have a feature to do a roll-ups of goals, for example, sub goals to roll up to parent goals. We'll see how that's going to work. Currently, it's not supported. And that's pretty much it as far as the important differences. Last slide. We talked about scorecards and how we can implement them. If you need help, if you want to learn more about it, if you need training, as I mentioned before, here are some links for you to contact me. And with that said, I would like to open it for questions. We have about maybe 10 minutes, maybe more. I apologize for the audio issues. So the question is from Bruce, can these different reports have different data sources? Absolutely. So Bruce, these reports can be implemented by different people, even different departments. They can connect to different data sources for your data warehouse, from whatever the data comes from. When it comes to goals, they really don't care where the data comes from. They can be completely different. They don't have to connect to the same data sources, which is a beauty, right? I mean, could be considered an advantage. To the best of my knowledge, it can be different data sources. I need to actually organize it with condition of caveat to know that filters are common, data type values, and even comparative values are of same value. So what Nitin is trying to say here is that, again, the user here has to be educated to apply the appropriate filters. So if they want to filter at a particular level, they have to go and specify these filters on the report, and they're going to be carried over once you connect the report to the goal. These filters are going to be carried over. But this is where I see quite a bit of confusion how that works. So they have to be educated. Now, in reality, based on my experience, all of these features are great for business users. I understand the thinking, self-service BI, but typical organization users, business users are really, in my opinion, they're just not willing to learn those features. And I see this over and over. So we have a fantastic feature in Power BI, just to give you another example, called personalize reports, personalized visuals. And this is so useful feature because what I see over and over when I go to clients is that you create a report, let's say a table, drills down to a particular level, but the users want to see different level of default. They want to, when they go to that page, they want actually to see a high level or lower level or whatever by default. So traditionally, what I see companies doing for every requirement like this, they go and create a new pages to the report to keep the users happy, right? That every view that you create, every report you create, it's becomes a liability. It has to be managed and so forth. Better option will be to use a personalized bookmarks, personalized visuals. When I show them, from some organizations is above their head, above their users, really. So these features are great, but you can, as a data analyst, can implement those dashboards if you like this scorecards, Power BI goals feature. For them, you can assemble them very quickly, and that's it. Sounds like we need separate scorecards for each department since they can change filters to show just their data. So yes, so if I want, so what options do we have? So let's say I want to have a revenue, I want to see the revenue for a particular store. Somebody says, no, I want to see the revenue for a particular country, right? So what options do we have there? If these users are within, well, actually, it really doesn't matter if they belong to the same department, but option number one is to keep on creating goals and sub goals. There is a limitation right now that you can have up to 4 sub goals within a goal. So this is a very low limit. So in this case, if I want to have a revenue by store, a revenue for North America, a revenue for Canada, so I want to capture all of this separately, then I have to keep on creating sub goals. But when I reach 4, that's pretty much the end of the story. So now I got to go and create another goal. So this is going to become more flexible in future. I'm pretty sure about this, but right now we have these limitations. The other option will be to say, oh, department one, let's say they come from different departments. Department one is going to create their own scorecard, and department B is going to create their own scorecard. And of course, the same limitation applies. You're still limited to 4 sub goals per goal. So you have to find creative ways to get around these limitations, at least for now. But yeah, they won't be able. Right now, we don't have a filtering feature at the goal level. By the way, behind the scenes, goals are implemented as Power BI reports. They use the same format, the same technology. Essentially, a scorecard is kind of a predefined Power BI report. But because they slice measures from different reports potentially, there is no way for you to specify a global filter, just like you cannot do today with dashboards. So that's why I was saying that for requirements like this, taking the first path, which is implementing DAX measures and KPI possibly inside the model, that's going to give you the most flexibility, right? So you can then organize it any way you want. You can have visualizations any want, filters any way you want, right? You're in complete control. When it comes to Power BI goals, you cannot have global filters. You cannot slice and dice them. You cannot roll them over. You cannot have a higher dimension that actually slices the goal. So there is limitations in there that you need to be aware of. Thank you, Theo. Are you excited about this feature? Is asking George. So I have mixed feelings. I already kind of expressed some of my sentiments. All of these features for business users are really depends on the maturity organization, George, and who's going to be using them. My biggest concern is limitations. I hit a limitation, and that's really bad. You go to a client and you buy them into this idea about scorecards and how easy it is, and everybody's noting it's a great feature. Let's go and do it. And they run to one of these limitations. So how do we filter? Okay, why 4 sub goals, right? And this is where the whole thing kind of breaks apart, right? So my approach typically is keep it simple, but also expect flexibility, some degree of flexibility, right? So the scorecard, the Power BI goals feature, as at this point, I'm really not that excited, to be honest with you. But who knows? Maybe Microsoft is gonna make it super duper, you know, in 1 year from now. And somebody's saying best use is plan versus actual, auto generate simple view and quick to implement trick. I guess. Thank you very much. I'm curious how customers will respond to this feature. Yet to be seen. So one trend that I see in Microsoft and what they do, they want to make premium more exciting. So when Power BI Premium came initially, it was all about scalability, about performance. You know, we're going to give you large data sets, and we're going to give you the ability to connect to the model behind the scenes and do useful things. But now I see more and more features being pushed as a premium feature. Obviously, you know, some of them are useful, some of them are not. My advice to customers always been, you know, start low. If you come to a premium feature that you like, consider upgrading to premium per user, or if you have a lot of users, to premium. So you'll probably see that in the future. There's going to be a lot of features that have nothing to do with scalability and performance. They're actually going to be premium features to make Microsoft, to make Power BI Premium more exciting and more desirable by end users. Any other questions? Well, if you have, please feel free to send me an email, get my contacts. I will let you know, give me an hour to put the recording in there. And that was it. Again, our next meeting is going to be on March 7th. Meanwhile, stay healthy. And I'll see you next month, I guess. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Tushar, I was late for the presentation. Yes, so I posted a link all the way in the very beginning. On the very beginning, let me see if I can find it. So it's right here. So all our recordings on YouTube available for free access, and this is the link right there. https://bit.ly/Atlanta-BI-REX. This is where you're gonna find all the videos, and if you know, in an hour, this video is gonna be there too. Thanks, Mary. Appreciate it. Stop the recording.